Hi folks, today I thought I'd talk a little bit about some running terms you might have heard of and what they mean and a little bit how you might use them. So the first two are aerobic and anaerobic, and those are the primary energy systems that you're using when you're doing any type of distance running. There are other sources of energy, but primarily you're going to be using either aerobic or anaerobic. So aerobic simply means with oxygen, and you're primarily burning fat. Now, I want to be clear, even though I say you're primarily burning fat, this isn't like it's taking inches off your waist. It's actually fatty acids. It's fat as a fuel source, not as a weight loss thing. Not to say you wouldn't lose weight. Obviously, losing weight is calories in, calories out, and everything helps. But don't think about this as, oh, I want to do more of this aerobic because I'm going to burn more fat off my waist, my thighs, whatever, because that's not what's going to happen. Now, fat is a great energy source because it's really rich in energy. The problem with it takes a long time to metabolize. Your body can't use it very quickly. That's why it's done during your slower running, because your body has time to metabolize fat and use it as the fuel source. Next, you have anaerobic, and that simply means it's without oxygen. And you're primarily using carbohydrates, glycogen, there's other various terms, but it's the carbs that you're using, and those are a little less rich as an energy source, but they're ready very quickly, which is why the faster you run, the harder your effort, the more your body is going to depend upon those carbs because they're really quick and available. But you have a very limited amount of carbohydrate in your body. That's why you take gels and marathons and things like that to help supplement that. But it burns very quickly and you don't need oxygen to do it. So in a 5K, about 84% of your energy requirements comes from the aerobic system. In a half marathon, it's about 94%. And in a full marathon, it's a whopping 98%. That's why the longer the distance you're training for, the more distance you have in easy running to help teach your body to be really good at using fat as a fuel source. Because if you're not good at using fat as a fuel source, you're not going to have a very successful marathon. But you need a lot of it still for a half marathon, but you need less of it. And you still need a lot of it for a 5K, but you need a lot less of it. Now, you've got three thresholds that you might hear about, and those are the aerobic threshold, the lactate threshold, and the anaerobic threshold. So let's talk about those real quick. So your aerobic threshold, you are primarily using fat as a fuel source. You're still using some carbs, but it is primarily fat when you're exercising slower than your aerobic threshold. You're producing some lactate. You produce lactate all the time. You might have heard it as lactic acid, but you burn it off pretty quickly. And for most people, that's typically around marathon pace. Now, I put marathon in that red border because that really varies a lot with your fitness level and how good you are at metabolizing. It's entirely possible that your aerobic threshold is higher, slower than your marathon pace. It's unlikely that it would be faster. So you've got to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, but that's technically where your aerobic threshold lies. Then you've got the lactate threshold. And when you have the lactate threshold, when you hit that, you are starting to accumulate lactate. You're not accumulating in large amounts yet, but you're accumulating it faster than your body can burn it off because it does burn it off as a little bit of a fuel source. It is using carbohydrates as your primary fuel source. You're probably absolutely still using some fat, but you're now primarily into carbs. That's typically around the half marathon pace. And again, I have that in that red box because your threshold could be above that. It could also be below that. If you look at the elites, the difference between their lactate threshold and their anaerobic threshold that I'll get to next are like this. I mean, they're very, very close together. Most of us have a little bit more of a gap in there. I have probably a 15, 20 second gap in my pace between where I think my lactate threshold is and where I think my anaerobic threshold is. And then finally, your anaerobic threshold, that's where lactate is building up fast. That's the one that you hear about that say, hey, you've got about an hour at this pace on rested legs before you're going to bonk because it's building up quickly. For most people, that's typically around your 10K pace. But again, that's going to vary a lot from person to person exactly where that's going to be. So then the question becomes, which system should I be using? Where should I be doing my training? That's a huge question. But aerobic is absolutely number one. If you think back to the chart I showed at the beginning, even the 5K, 84% of your energy is going to come from that aerobic system. So you need still a fair amount of running. A lot of your running is going to be easy pace above your aerobic threshold because you really want to be good with that fat system. And for the other ones, it's going to vary a lot by the race that you're doing. The longer the distance, the less work you need to worry about at an anaerobic or lactate threshold. You still have some, but in a marathon, you don't have quite as much. You've got way more of the slower stuff. In a 5K, on the other end of the spectrum, although you're still going to have a lot of the slower stuff, you're going to have more of the work done at those other thresholds because those are the energy systems that you need to train. So hopefully that helps and wasn't too confusing.